Hi guys, welcome to another video. We're taking a bit of a break from this latest gouache obsession that I've been on, just to do a bit of a mini review of Sennelier professional water paints. I've had this set of tubes for a while and I thought they'd be perfect for the thin layering wash technique I wanted to use here. Now, the paper was a bit of an experiment. I generally tend to use hot press paper, which is smooth, but it's not really as good for this technique as cold press or textured paper. And sometimes it's nice to just change things up a bit. Now, I'm pretty sure that you're familiar with this paint brand. I think a lot of artists on YouTube tend to use it. And the general consensus is that it's brilliant for layering and luminosity, which is why a lot of botanical artists use it. I've actually noticed in more recently published botanical books that artists have been slowly replacing their Winsor & Newtons with Sennelier. About 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. Now, I've personally not used it extensively. I think there's another video on this channel actually where I do use it maybe for the first time. But yeah, this was only really the second time that I made the conscious effort to only use Sennelier. So my subject here is a pale-headed rosella, which is an Australian parrot. We have a huge selection from which to choose from for a subject. And I chose it specifically because I had the urge to use some very bright spring greens. I'm also using here a little ceramic palette for mixing the paint, and I just dabbed out the colors that I want to be able to just use them in this session. And since I do use tubes, I get the benefit of immediate saturated washes. Now, in saying that, if I had to choose a set again, I may actually I would have opted for the pans instead of the tubes, because this particular set is really heavy and clunky, and taking tubes around is a bit messy. But since the binder that the paint uses is honey, I also avoid pouring it out to make my own travel palettes, because they never dry sufficiently. So even though I use one of the colors, I think it's Naples yellow, extensively, it actually never leaves my little studio palette. Oh, and speaking of, I did a video recently going through my studio palette and all the colors that I choose to use in it. So, feel free to jump back a couple of videos to check it out. So as I'm using this paint, my immediate thought is that it's incredibly vibrant and flows very well. Now, it's not as powerful, I don't know if that's the word to use, it's not as strong or as saturated as Schminke, which I feel needs less pigment to give me sort of the same amount of color. But for a nature artist, or somebody who wants their work to be very true to life, it's really good. This is mainly because it doesn't granulate a lot, and certainly not like Daniel Smith. I've had a really bad experience with the granulating Daniel Smith pigment before. I don't know, I may have mentioned this in a previous story, but I was painting a really detailed bird painting, and I picked a brown color and I stuck it on the bird's head, and it went crazy. It was actually one of the natural pigment colors, and they granulate like nothing else. And I wasn't expecting that. I may have picked it up by accident, but it took me ages to fix that mistake. It actually almost ruined the painting because it is supposed to be true to life. Obviously, it was my fault for not knowing what I was picking up, but I feel that that would be less of a problem with Sennelier. Now that if it looks a bit like I'm struggling with the paper, you would be right. I actually have very little experience with cold press paper, and it's obvious that I'm going against my instincts to control every brushstroke and to add limitless detail. But the point of this exercise is to give the paint some free rein and to loosen up my style a tiny bit. Now, this is a bit of a goal for me because for both my recent gouache and oil paint work, I'm a little more fond of a looser method, and but I can't seem to translate that into watercolor. So I guess to wrap up this mini review, I really like the Sennelier paint. I wouldn't buy the tubes if I want to use them to make like a portable palette because they don't really set for me. I don't know if that's just because of Sydney weather, but if you want that option to be able to travel with your paint, then I do recommend getting one of the pan sets instead. I don't think these are any less saturated than most other professional brands, and you'll get a lot out of them. And I think that translucence is great because it forces you as the artist to keep the white of the paper in mind and to not, muddy the paint. So I highly recommend it. I guess it really depends on where you live and what you're comparing this to in terms of price. Now I know that Sennelier is really expensive if I was to buy it in a Sydney art store. Now mine I've bought while traveling in Europe or through the Jackson's art site, and I'll link below to the relevant page from Jackson's where you may be able to pick up your own. I think they're actually really affordable from Jackson's from memory. But if I had to choose a brand in Australia, if I had to buy from a Sydney store, I would probably stick with maybe Art Spectrum, which is an Australian brand, but I think I prefer Sennelier. So if you can get it, and if it's not the most expensive thing around, I really recommend it. Now, just as a quick sort of FYI, we've now reached over 500 subscribers, and thanks so much for that, and welcome to all our new subscribers. But if you do have any art related topics you'd like me to chat about for future videos, or if you have any questions, just let me know in the comments below, and I will look into putting something together in the future. So anyway, take care of yourselves. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.